We're marking a year since that amazing revolution.
Hasina is directly responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of her own people. And that's something which Bangladeshis will not forget and they may not forgive. This is a brutal regime. This is a regime which kills, murders with impunity, without any accountability. It's one thing that India cannot undo: the lies, the disinformation from the highest corridors of power in India to your mainstream pundits. You can remove the head of the snake, that head will grow back. And that's what we're concerned about. There needs to be a zero tolerance to Indian interference in Bangladeshi domestic affairs. I'm optimistic about the future of my motherland.
It has been 1 year since the cruel government of Sheikh Hasina of Bangladesh was overthrown by a courageous popular student revolt. Many students lost their lives as a result of the deliberate shoot-to-kill policies of the administration. How has Bangladesh fared in this past year? We have journalist Dilly Hussain once again back on the show to help us understand the new Bangladesh. We're here in Kuala Lumpur at the Prophetic Strategy Summit, and I'm here with Dilly Hussain, who, alhamdulillah, we spoke a year back now about the revolution that took place in Bangladesh. And Dilly, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, Jalal bhai. Fantastic to be on.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you for coming in again. And I know we're now in KL, in Malaysia, but I think it's an important conversation to have because it's a year on. So we're marking a year since that really amazing revolution. I think, most people at the time were amazed at just how the students had organized.
Indeed.
And we had a terrific conversation. There was great feedback from our viewers, in particular viewers in Bangladesh, who thought it was a very fair summary of what was taking place. I mean, we spoke just before Hasina fell. But even at the time, I think it was a very balanced account of the different groups and different movements. So take us back to that point in August last year when Hasina fell. Tell us about what culminated in her losing her position and what happened in those weeks.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. So basically, all kicked off last July. When the quota system was reintroduced.
Yeah.
Now, the quota system is a economic employment policy which basically factors in marginalized and discriminated groups within Bangladesh, and to ensure that they have a particular percentage or quota within the civil service. Now, as part of this, a large significant portion of that would be allocated to the descendants and the children of the freedom fighters,
right?
Those who fought in the liberation war against West Pakistan at the time. Now, what ended up happening, and what was the case for many years under Awami League and Sheikh Hasina, is that this particular quota, those for the descendants of the freedom fighters, was ultimately abused. It was immensely corrupt, and ultimately it was all given away to Awami League loyalists, many of whom were not descendants of freedom fighters. And in multiple police raids and investigations, false certificates were found in the homes of Awami League ministers, where they were giving out fraudulent certificates to claim that people were descendants or related to the freedom fighters, when in reality what was actually happening, a huge significant proportion of these jobs were basically given to Awami League loyalists. And that's one of the ways in which the Awami League regime kept its control within Bangladesh. Now, people may be wondering, what's so special about these jobs? Well, in Bangladesh, if you land a civil service job, you're set for life.
Right.
And if you can claim to be a descendant of the freedom fighters who fought in 71, you're basically looked after generation after generation. Now, this particular quota system was actually repealed. It was actually abolished, and it was reintroduced last July. And that is what kicked off the riots. Or the protests rather. And what really peaked it was when Hasina came on media and accused those who were peacefully protesting, primarily those who's from Dhaka University, but then it spread it out to other universities in Dhaka, including private universities like BRAC, was that, who do you expect us to give these jobs to? The Rajakkars? Now, Rajakkar is a derogatory term used for those who fought and sided with West Pakistan during the liberation war And in fact, it is a term which for many years under Awami League and Sheikh Hasina has basically been used to criminalize people and to silence dissent. And that's essentially what it is. It was a policy which was initially repealed, then reintroduced last June, early July. Students took to the streets, basically saying that this is unfair, this needs to be reviewed, it needs to be either radically reformed or repealed again. And there was just a brutal reaction from the regime, from the police and from other law enforcement agencies.
Sheikh Hasina loyalists argue that her downfall was a result of a US-sponsored plot to depose her. I mean, how credible, even if there's a semblance of credibility, is there to that claim?
I mean, I looked into this and did so very early on.
Yeah.
And what's interesting before we get into this is that the same US which Awami League loyalists claim were behind this rainbow revolution, as they call it. I don't specifically like that term, but the same US administration that they are claiming wanted to overthrow Hasina was the same US administration that they're seeking to lobby against Muhammad Yunus's interim government. So it doesn't make sense. On the one hand, they claim that America was behind it, but in the same breath, they're also seeking the same American administration to pressure the Yunus government. I don't think there is any truth to it.
Right.
Quite frankly, Bangladesh is seen by the US through the eyes of India. So naturally, there would have been some concern with regards to the stability of Bangladesh and how it falls into the broader American interests in the region. But that said, Muhammad Yunus, Nobel Peace Prize winner, who was the kind of interim head of state, is very close to the Clintons. He is very close to the Democrats. There's no denying that.
Yeah.
But to say that there was an American hand in what took place in that revolution is basically taking away any legitimacy and agency and accountability from the Awami League regime. I am yet to be convinced of anything conclusive or tangible to suggest that America was behind it. Even the claims that they were seeking to basically establish a military base there. Well, 1 year on, and there seems to be absolutely no movement, no suggestion to indicate that that was the case. So no, I do not believe that America had a hand in play, but that doesn't necessarily mean that American intelligence services may not have got a whiff of where this was heading. We know that they have intelligence assets on the ground in key Muslim majority countries. They might have got a whiff of where this was going, but to say that they had a hand behind it or had a leading role behind it, I just don't buy that, and it's a lazy argument.
You know, in answer to the first question, you talked about the civil service jobs and how that bred discontentment within the population. But of course, the Hasina government was far more brutal as well than just sort of giving out corrupt jobs to its cronies. Tell me about the Ainagor, the House of Mirrors, a Bangladeshi intelligence detention facility where the regime disappeared, imprisoned and tortured political dissidents.
Look, the Hasina regime giving out jobs, civil service jobs to their loyalists is, it's the least of the issues with the Hasina regime. That's just one of many things. This was a brutal, violent regime, a regime which is responsible for the deaths of not thousands, tens of thousands of innocent Bangladeshis, political dissidents, people who protested peacefully. From the Shapla Square massacre of May 2013 to the anti-traffic protests of 2019 to other protests that are taking place. This is a brutal regime. This is a regime which kills, murders, abducts, imprisons with impunity, without any accountability. Now, Ainagor, which translates to the House of Mirrors, was a secret detention center whereby it was underground, very similar to Sednaya prison.
Right.
And the reason why it's called Ainagor is because some aspects of that detention center was surrounded by mirrors.
Yeah.
And these were horrific conditions, and people were kept there that were assumed dead or missing, and they were there for like 5-6 years. You know, these were political dissidents, peaceful activists, civil society members, relatives of opposition party, and they were kept in horrific conditions, assumed to be dead or missing for years. And similar to when Sednaya was revealed and exposed after Bashar fell, that was kind of Bangladesh, not kind of, it was Bangladesh's Sednaya moment. Horrific conditions, cold rooms, all people, very little food. There was even stories of pregnant women who gave birth in these prisons. And there were even cases where mothers and children were kidnapped, and the kids were kept away from their mothers, and they needed milk and so forth. Horrific stories. Men, women, young and old, political, non-political. The people that were kept there in these dungeons, they were from a wide variety of the political spectrum. Yeah. And it was completely horrific, and similar to the scenes of Sednaya. We saw Bangladeshis when they found Ainargor, they smashed up the walls, and they saw the evidence of the dire conditions in which people were kept there for years.
And so the Awami League, Sheikh Hasina's party, has now been prescribed as a political organization. I mean, do you think that's a fair thing? I mean, we've got a political party, but obviously will have corrupt elites within them, but it was a mass party, and it would have had ordinary Bangladeshis within the party. I mean, is that the prescription as a terrorist organization? Is that sort of a fair judgment, do you think, on behalf of the new government?
I personally am not in support of this decision, simply because Bangladesh has a history of banning political opposition parties, right? So Awami League, they banned Jamaat-e-Islam. That prescription has now been lifted. BNP was banned. Yeah. We're now assuming, and we're going to discuss this obviously later on, the BNP are expected to win a landslide election. At least that's what many are saying, and many analysts are observing. And banning political parties is just simply not the way forward, quite frankly, for the very reasons that you mentioned. That look, within the party and its support structure, you can have ordinary people that are not ideologues. You can have ordinary people who are labourers and support the party for whatever reasons they are, and didn't take part in any of its oppressive policies or violence. That said, I would have been more supportive if the Chhatra League was banned, the student wing, because it is the student wing that has the blood of tens of thousands on its hands. And this is a criminal entity that was involved in corruption, racketeering, murder, rape, drug dealing. Every crime under the sun, Chhatra League, the student wing of Awami League, were involved in it, and they ruled with a reign of terror across Bangladesh. This is a student wing, but they moved like a political mafia on the ground. Extortion, kidnappings, you name it, Jalal Bhai. There's not a crime that they weren't involved in. Now, supporters may say, well, BNP student wing have also done some of these things, and Shibir, which is Jamaat-e-Islam student wing, have also indulged in some of these violent acts. Yeah, they may have, but incomparable, Jalal Bhai, incomparable. Like, you go to Bangladesh, to any of the major cities, to any of the campuses, and to any of the local bazaars, and they will tell you that no student wing of any political party was involved in organized crime in the way that Chhatra League was. And we are talking about murder, we're talking about rape, we're talking about abduction, we're talking about extortion, stuff which is, quite frankly, should not be associated with any political wing of a party. So I am against the banning of Awami League, simply because, what does this mean? Does this just mean that whenever a new ruling party comes, they'll just ban the opposition party? That's just not the way forward, quite frankly. But I would have been more supportive of the Chhatra League and its structures and its key figureheads to certainly be arrested, face prison time, and potentially face prescription, because they actually did engage in terrorism, in political violence.
Right, okay. And has there been like an assessment or a reassessment of the 1971 revolution? I mean, I note that Sheikh Hasina used that Razakkar, which you talked about in the last conversation, those who betrayed the revolution, and she sort of abused the memory of 1971, there's been a conversation, a heated conversation about the place of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, her father, the so-called father of the nation. Today, it's very openly talked about that he was an autocrat and even a tyrant within some quarters, at least, of Bangladeshi society. In fact, I think his picture was removed from banknotes, if I'm not mistaken. So is there how far has there been a reassessment of those events of 71? Because until now, if you had even questioned Mujibur Rahman, you were unpatriotic and part of his sort of betrayal movement.
For sure. I mean, look, the entire discussion around the 1971 Liberation War and the events that led up to is a very, very polarizing discussion. It's a traumatic discussion for many Bangladeshis who experienced violence and rape from the West Pakistani army at the time, but as well as other elements that were siding with Pakistan. And in all honesty, and I say this to you as a Bangladeshi or someone of Bangladeshi heritage, I say this to you as someone who puts his deen before any type of national or ethnic identity, that it's not black and white. The narrative behind the events of 71 is not black and white. But let's assess what the situation was. And if you allow me just a bit of time to just give like a basic chronology, all right? So East Pakistan, which is basically modern day Bangladesh, unfortunately for the first 20 years of this new Pakistan that was found after partition, faced and experienced really unjustifiable levels of disparity between how state wealth was distributed, how the state institutions would respond to calamities and emergencies like cyclones and floods and stuff like this. The fact that rice would be produced in East Pakistan, taken to West Pakistan and sold back to East Pakistan. Simply, this was not the type of brotherhood nation that anyone envisaged, right? If you think about it, why was Pakistan found in the first place? It was found on the basis of La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. Pakistan ke matlab kya? La ilaha illallah. And that this would be two nations, essentially one, that would be a safe haven for Muslims to practice their deen freely. And that wasn't the case from the very onset. Unfortunately, there was a very racialized political elite within the Punjab that dominated the military establishment in West Pakistan, who continued policies of oppression and discrimination towards their East Pakistani brothers. Now, the breaking point, the straw that broke the camel's back, I believe there was a cyclone in 1968 or 69. And the floods were terrible. And the response from the central government in West Pakistan was very little. And when there was some response to that emergency, it was too little, too late. And there was a build-up of these events taking place that led to 1969, 1970. Then there was the election. Where Sheikh Mujib won a landslide. He won a landslide, but it was rejected by Ayub Khan. It was rejected by the Islamic parties of West Pakistan. So in essence, had they accepted the results of that election, Sheikh Mujib would have been the prime minister of both East and West Pakistan. And there was absolutely no way West Pakistan was going to allow that. So they put him in prison. They basically held an election. He won a landslide and then stuck him in prison, basically because they didn't want to accept the decision or the outcome of the election. But let's also not forget India's role in all of this. India's worst nightmare then and now remains a Muslim majority Pakistan or country in its eastern and western flank. Militarily, this is a nightmare. I mean, it doesn't take much to imagine what it would look like. In the case of an open total war, you'd have West Pakistan fighter jets bombing India and then refueling in East Pakistan or Bangladesh, and bada bing, bada boom, back and forth, back. It's a nightmare. And in fact, every time India made any kind of gains in occupied Kashmir was during 1971. It was whenever there was issues and instability in Pakistan. Whenever India lost territory in Kashmir, it was in the early formative years of East and West Pakistan. So there's all these factors to consider, and there is no denying that there were lines of communication open between Sheikh Mujib and Indian intelligence services at the time. To what extent that relationship was is yet to be, we may never know. But to say that there was absolutely no Indian role in, putting Sheikh Mujib forward as this father of the country and the leader of this new liberation movement, that was certainly the case. But what ends up happening is that you have extremes. You'll have those who say that the entire thing was an Indian plan from the get-go. Many Pakistani nationalists would say this. But then there's others that would say, no, India had absolutely no role in the events that led up to 1971, and that in fact it was entirely an organic movement for liberation, a cultural movement, a cultural revolution against West Pakistani hegemonic occupation of Bangladesh. And I think the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Right.
And the truth in the middle is that Sheikh Mujib won a landslide election. He was a very popular leader. And when liberation was established in 1971, he was seen as the father of the nation. But very quickly, I mean, within a year, he did in fact become a tyrant, and he made Bangladesh into a one-party state, which led to his assassination, I think, within 2 years.
Can I ask you about India's position generally towards this last year? Because, of course, they've lost out in a very big way.
Huge way.
With Hasina's ouster. Now, how has India responded to this last year? And what's the sort of feeling on the ground in Bangladesh towards India now? Because, of course, for a while, I mean, India had this tremendous soft power in Bangladesh, and culturally, at least, it was viewed in a positive light, possibly by great numbers of people. So what is the position of India now in Bangladesh?
So the dominant narrative that was shaped by Hasina and the Awami League were that India was not saviors, but they were the ones who basically assisted Bangladeshis in getting their independence.
Yeah.
India basically saw Bangladesh as an extension of itself. And in fact, military dossiers and documents and internal comms are now coming to surface that actually what many Indian policymakers at the time really wanted was to basically annex East Pakistan and basically make it a part of India. Now, obviously, that didn't take place, but they ensured that their tentacles of influence were deeply entrenched within the Bangladeshi state and pretty much in every ministry, and also with a huge raw presence, Indian intelligence presence on the ground.
Right.
India has always seen Bangladesh as a vessel, right? As an extension of itself.
Yeah.
When it seeks to open the dam, it will flood it. When it wishes to increase tariffs, it will do so. And of all the various administrations and governments and parties, from the kind of military leaders that Bangladesh has had, from General Zia and others, India's favoured party was always Awami League. And in fact, India shaped the entire narrative through cultural influences, through Bangladeshi Hindus, what 1971 meant, and particularly what India's role was in the independence, to the extent that there would be no independence had it not been for India's intervention. And that's also untrue. Bulk of the fighting against West Pakistan was actually done by Bengalis in East Pakistan, and basically India intervened pretty much quite late in the game when it was practically done and dusted. That's the truth of the matter from my reading of it. And I'd be interested to see if anyone would correct me, because you would think that there would be no liberation or independence without Indian intervention, but that's simply not true. Yeah. There's also another problematic narrative, and this is a cultural one which has been ingrained in the minds of many Bangladeshis and has been incorporated within the education curriculum. And that is that Bangladesh itself is more about Bengali culture, which incorporates significant elements of Hindu culture and has little to or nothing to do with Islam and Muslims, because anything to do with Islam and Muslims is associated with West Pakistan. So India has played a key role in popular culture, in creating narratives, in shaping educational reforms and curriculums, and this was pretty much all done via their assets in Bangladesh, but primarily via Awami League and Hasina. Now, I visit Bangladesh often. There was a period where I couldn't visit. It wasn't safe for me to visit, but alhamdulillah, I visit often. And the sentiments towards India has always been, depending on who you speak to, is that unless you're an ardent ideologue of the Awami League, it has always basically been that they claim to have helped us. They claimed that our independence or liberation wouldn't have happened without the intervention. But quite frankly, whatever they did for their own behest. They did for their own advantage. They did for their own geopolitical interests. Others would say that no, in fact, the main victor from the 71 liberation was not Bangladesh. It was actually India. India won. India managed to basically split Pakistan into two. Its worst political military nightmare was to have Pakistan in its eastern and western flank. And in fact, India is the real enemy. The Hindutva majority, India, especially now, is actually the main problem with Bangladesh and how it sees itself and its political future. Now, I would say that India is openly public enemy number one, without a shadow of a doubt. The amount of Indian flags that have been burnt and the Modi placards and the slogans against him. I mean, alhamdulillah, look, we're probably going to get into this in terms of what does the elections look like? What does the outcome look like? What does the future look like? Yeah. And it's sad to say that I don't have the optimism that I did when I was here a year ago. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the conversation we had a year ago, I don't share that level of optimism. I mean, there's still things to be optimistic about, but it's unfortunate because India has in many ways managed to regain some level of control within key institutions within Bangladesh, primarily education, culture and media. When you have newspapers like Pratham Alo, Daily Star, who basically, to put it mildly and politely, are no different to the Indian media with regards to their takes on domestic Bangladeshi issues. And played a key role in the criminalization and censorship of political dissidents from the Bangladesh Nationalist Party to Jamaat-e-Islam and to generally Islamic movements and civil society groups. So there is a deep distrust and hatred for India as we speak. India doesn't help itself when their ministers, senior ministers, come out and refer to Bengalis as cockroaches. When they speak of Bangladesh as an extension of themselves. When they speak about, and we're talking about cabinet ministers here, Jalal, these are not like anchors or like activists. We're talking about people who are part of the BJP-led government coming on media, consistently talking about Bangladesh and Bengalis in a very derogatory and dehumanized way. And that just further reaffirms what Bangladeshis have believed for some time, and that is that India is not actually interested in any kind of autonomous Bangladesh who can decide their political future. Rather, they see us as a colony of theirs, and quite frankly, their true colours have coming out now, and they're throwing all the toys out of the pram. And we saw this consistent and coordinated and vicious and malicious fake news propaganda, misinformation campaign, where there was a Hindu genocide in the wake of the August the 5th. Very similar to what Assadists did when Assad fell, that there was a genocide against the Druze and genocide against the Alawites. Yes, there were some sectarian tensions and communal violence, but to say that there was any remote type of genocide towards Hindus is quite farcical and quite a lie and unlaughable. More so because Hindus enjoy in Bangladesh a level of freedom and a level of freedom to practice their religion and access to power that a Muslim in India could not dream of. And it's so hypocritical that India would take this position whilst the world sees how it treats its Muslim minorities, its Dalit minorities, its Christian minorities, its pogroms, its bulldozing of mosques, its treatment of Kashmiris, that it there has the audacity to claim such lies. But it did so in such a coordinated way, to the extent that it even reached Washington. And you had Trump make the statement before the election, before the last election, before November 2024. He came out and he basically made a statement against violence against Hindus. He basically parroted a lie from the Awami League. And we also know that Hasina and her son Sajib have been funding millions of dollars to American policy think tanks to basically discredit the Yunus government, albeit they're not perfect, but to, spread this misinformation and to apply pressure. So India at the moment is in a better position than it was when we were sat here a year ago, Jalal Bhai. But one thing that India cannot undo is what Bangladeshis saw for 6 to 8 months consistently, and that was the lies, the disinformation, the misinformation from the highest corridors of power in India to your mainstream pundits. And that's something which Bangladeshis will not forget and they may not forgive.
We've talked about politicians and pundits who've used this Hindu genocide trope in order to try to carve out divisions within the wider society. I mean, I think that There's a case also of Trump administration officials, who are quite linked to the Hindutva lobby.
They are.
The likes of Sajib Wazid, Joy, Hasina's son, and Tulsi Gabbard, who have spoken about the persecution of minorities in the country and the creation of an Islamist caliphate. I mean, talk to Gabbard in particular. She seems to be a voice for that Hasina element.
So there's various senior policymakers within the Trump administration that are of Indian heritage, that have deep Hindutva background.
Right.
And Tulsi Gabbard is obviously one. I believe is one of them. One of the most outspoken defenders of Modi, the BJP-led government. And one of the lies which was spread in a very vicious and malicious way was that there was going to be an Islamist takeover. Now, what did happen was that when Hasina fell, various Islamic groups and movements took to the streets and would celebrate like any other groups and movements. They were happy. There was a level of freedom that they can now express what they couldn't express for the best part of 15 years.
Right.
And that included groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir and others who took to the streets and other groups that were waving white and black kalima flags. And this was, of course, taken by the likes of Daily Star and Baitulmaal and the Indian media, then amplified on X. And we know that Elon Musk has tweaked the algorithm in such a way that the more polarizing such news is, the more momentum and more viral it goes. And it literally reached to the White House. And the likes of Tulsi Gabbard and others, they spread this lie, and there was absolutely no basis for it. There is absolutely no basis, as far as I'm aware. And when I visited straight after the revolution, and in my engagements with the likes of Jamaat-e-Islam and other Islamic groups and movements on the ground, that there was no open or secret plan to make Bangladesh an Islamic state. And let's also make something very clear, and we discussed this briefly in our last podcast regarding this last year, is that the revolution itself, no one party or ideology can claim it. The Islamist or the Islamic groups or the Islamists can't claim it. The secularists can't claim it. The nationalists can't claim it. It was a joint movement amongst students who came from various ideological leanings, right? From, your nationalist, to your Maoist, to your liberal leftist, to your Islamic groups and movements. And it was a coordinated effort by the students of Dhaka University, which then spread to other universities, which then galvanized the entire country, right, in the space of 3 weeks. No ideology and no party can make any claim to that. And any accusation or claim that there was going to be an Islamist takeover is just, again, laughable and something that should be categorically rejected.
And Muhammad Yunus as a prime minister, I mean, how do you think he's fared in this last year?
I think he's had a huge, difficult task at hand.
Right.
Look, I'm not going to make excuses for Muhammad Yunus's liberal policies, his over-reliance on NGOs, his approach to basically kind of treating Bangladesh as a charity box. We were hoping that someone of his caliber, of his experience, of his entrepreneurial veneer and experience, that he would, introduce more radical changes. Considering that this was a revolutionary movement, we were hoping of revolutionary policies, right? But what we kind of saw under Yunus was that it was this kind of, again, this repeat and over-reliance on Western NGOs and Western funding and trying to appease the US to say that, no, we're not X, Y, and Z, we're not going to be this. But that was a given. But that said, Muhammad Yunus compared to Hasina is incomparable. I don't think Muhammad Yunus himself, this is my genuine feeling, I do not believe that this man is responsible directly for ordering the murder of one person. That's Allah knows best. But Hasina, beyond any reasonable doubt, is directly responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of her own people. And that's why the court case has begun for crimes against humanity in absentia, which are taking place as we speak. And you know what? Before we get to Yunus, if India is seeking any kind of normalcy, again, they should perhaps hand Hasina back. And then we can talk about normalcy. How dare India talk about any type of, normalization or a return to what was the past, whilst you have the very tyrant in which the people mobilized to remove. So I don't think there will be any normalcy or normalization or return to the past whilst Hasina remains there. And one of the things which has been consistent throughout the revolution and what followed thereafter is this kind of realization that Bangladesh has a political destiny without the control of India. Yes, we have to survive with India. India shares a border which surrounds Bangladesh by 80 or 90%. Right. Bangladesh has no choice but to coexist in the best possible way with India. But to act as a colony, to act as a vassal, that's simply something which Bangladesh, I believe, would not accept. The laity here, the laity, and I'm hoping that the new National Citizens Party, led by the likes of Sarjis Alam and Hasnat Abdullah, who I met briefly whilst I was in Bangladesh, that they carry the momentum. How that converts or translates into votes when the elections happen in the first half of next year, might be April, very likely. I don't know, but Muhammad
NCP is a student-led movement.
It's the first student-led party in the history of Bangladesh, which is basically the Students Against Discrimination movement. Ultimately, the students that led the revolution against Hasina. They formed this party, the National Citizenship Party, being led by the likes of Sarjis Alam and Hasnat Abdullah. But back to Yunus. Yunus has had an impossible task, because not only is he dealing with internal strife of Awami League loyalists still deeply embedded within pretty much every facet of the state. You've got this external pressure from India, external pressure of trade tariffs and all kinds of issues. And given that he's dealing with all of this, his laudable attempt at major reforms is particularly to do with electoral reforms, whereby there would be a national effort to register every single Bangladeshi who's eligible to vote. Because up until now, you don't know who's alive, who's dead, who's voting for who. And it's well known in Bangladesh as well as in Pakistan, but it's well known in Bangladesh that under the Hasina regime, the police would be paid to man polling offices. This is known. And you'd go and vote for your dead relatives. All types of fraud taking place widespread across the country. Right. And one of the good things and very laudable things which Yunus is trying to do, and I don't believe he'll be able to execute and implement it before April, is to have a national register of Bangladeshi voters. Obviously, there were other reforms to do with employment, to the judiciary, and other reforms. I think it was 6 or 8 reforms, but the key one was the electoral reforms, because quite frankly, we need to know who's eligible to vote, and then to incorporate and to create an infrastructure whereby the voting system would be done in a fair way. Now, as someone who's a critic of or a skeptic of the democratic system and the entire way in which the Muslim majority world seek this particular mechanism for their political destination, that conversation aside, I think it needs to be acknowledged that what Yunus attempted to do and is still trying to do is something that is very much needed. And I do not believe whichever party comes to power, very likely Bangladesh Nationalist Party, would seek to continue these reforms. He wanted time to implement these reforms. He basically wanted around 18 months to implement these reforms.
Right.
People were concerned that he would take the full 5 years, right? And keep in mind that Muhammad Yunus, he was brought in by the choice of the student leaders who led the revolution.
Yeah.
He did not put himself forward. He was brought in by the likes of Mahfouz Alam, Nahid Islam, and these guys who led the movement.
Yeah.
So, and not too long ago, the pressure got so bad for him that he was thinking about resigning. Right? He got the cabinet together and he said, look, I can't do this anymore. But they insisted that he stays in power. Right. So Yunus has had a huge challenge and a huge task at hand. He's not been able to execute many of his reforms. He's attempted it. Some of it's still ongoing. The question now is whether any of this will continue when the new ruling party comes to power.
So in that answer, you talked about the possibility of a BNP-led government, and also you talked about the prospects of this new student movement that has been created, and whether it would have electoral weight as it did on the street. So there's a lot of moving parts here, but elections are going to take place next year, and it's, from what you gather, BNP, which is the main opposition party to Awami League, the BNP will probably win that election. I mean, what's the Just talk me through what we should be expecting in these elections and beyond. And the prospects, by the way, of Islamic or very overtly Islamic groups like Jamaat-e-Islami, which that haven't done very well in previous elections.
So let's start with how these various opposition parties responded and reacted to the fall of Hasina. To begin with, they were all very much supportive of the Yunus interim government and were calling for, to give him time and space for reform. The BNP changed its tone within 3 to 6 months. They realized that they're at the cusp of taking the country again, and that if there was an election the next day, there'd be a landslide. And the more time that is given to the Yunus interim government to implement these reforms, the less chances they will have to get that landslide.
Right.
So if you give the interim government, let's say 18 months, 24 months, or the whole 4 or 5 years, which they were never going to allow, because they'll threaten them with protests and what do you call it when trade unions go on strikes, or what they call it hartal in Bengali. And there was always these constant threats that were made by BNP directly, indirectly. There's also, we'll get into this with regards to India's role within the BNP. There's many that have said that the BNP is already infiltrated.
Really?
Right? We had a gentleman called Salahuddin Ahmed who returned to India, a senior BNP leader, who was in India in exile for 9 years. All of a sudden, he's come back, and people are saying that he could potentially be an asset of India. We know that Mirza Fakhrul Alamgir, the general secretary of the party, potentially had line of comms open with India as well. We know that Tariq Rahman, who currently resides in London, could also potentially have line of comms open with India. Now, I'm not talking about line of comms open with India from the perspective that any assuming ruling party would have to with their neighbor and their biggest trading partner, but from the perspective that certain interests have to be maintained, that certain positions by certain individuals have to be kept. Those things cannot change. So the major concerns there. So BNP initially were for this unitary effort to support Yunus and his reforms. But very quickly, within 3 to 4 months, they were like calling for elections. They were basically coming out by saying that, look, let students be students and let politicians run the country. Students should not be running a country. You've done the revolution. You've led the people. You've galvanized the people. You're not state makers. You're not policy makers. You're not statecrafters. It's time for you to go back to university, basically. And they knew, and this is true, that the more time they gave the Yunus government, the more chance that a new party that would form, which is now the NCP, to go into an alliance potentially with Jamaat-e-Islam and other political parties, there'll be more momentum.
How likely is that?
I don't think it's likely now, simply because I don't know how much of this will translate into votes, Jalal Bhai. Because Jamaat-e-Islam is a popular party. There's no denying that. They're the 3rd biggest political party in Bangladesh. They enjoy huge levels of support. But for some reason, that doesn't translate to votes, because I believe there's this inherent distrust in the psyche of many Bangladeshis towards Jamaat-e-Islam, which is unfortunate, and it dates back to the indoctrination after 71. That Jamaat-e-Islam in civil society are fantastic. In humanitarian efforts, they're fantastic. They are the most educated, the most well-spoken, the well-dressed. They do so much khidmah for the communities up and down the country.
They run schools.
It runs schools and hospitals and Islamic banks and everything. But for some reason, that doesn't translate to votes and seats in parliament. So it'll be interesting to see what the 2026 elections, will deliver. But I am not so optimistic in Jamaat-e-Islam potentially getting many seats. I'm not even that optimistic, sadly, of the National Citizenship Party, the student-led party, getting that many seats. I mean, I would want them to. I would want them to. I would want them to, become a healthy opposition to the BNP-led government. But I just don't see that happening, because there's lots of internal plots happening, Jalal Bhai. There's many insiders there that are causing internal strife. People are being killed and kidnapped, and the whole idea is to create this fear of instability and turmoil, which will then justify a strong armed BNP party coming into power. This is textbook stuff we've seen in Bangladesh, we've seen in Pakistan. So do I see Jamaat-e-Islam gaining many seats in the next election? I don't. It'd be good if they did. There's just this age-old issue of popular support doesn't necessarily translate to votes. The NCP, one would hope that, considering that these were the guys who led the revolution, your likes of Hasnat Abdullah and Sajis Alam, who are like superstars in the country,
Really?
that you would hope that they'd have huge support, but there's not much optimism there either, because the BNP, through its grassroots bodies, have instilled amongst the minds of Bangladeshis that, similar to the narrative, what the Awami League would have said, is that these are students. You're going to really put the future of this country on the hands of students who have never run countries, never put together policies. So a BNP majority-led government is something that should be expected. The biggest concerns of many Bangladeshis, especially those who supported and participated in the revolution, is that it's just going to be Awami League 2.0 with, empty rhetoric in support of the revolution. We hope and pray that's not the case, but many are fearing that this will be the case.
So one final question for you, Ben Dilly. I mean, you sounded a slightly less optimistic, a pessimistic note earlier on in the interview where, and that's quite different to how you were feeling last year, where you were far more optimistic about the student revolution. I mean, this is pre-Hasina. Why? Like, what's your thinking about Bangladesh's trajectory in this coming year and beyond?
Jalal, but as a Muslim, we have to remain optimistic.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that the optimism that I had a year ago is not the optimism I have now because of what surfaced and how it's played out.
Yeah.
Let's make no mistake and take anything away with what was achieved last July and August the 5th.
Yeah.
It was a huge accomplishment.
Yeah.
Historic. To be able to bring down Hasina and the Awami League and to send her running via a helicopter to India was something which Bangladeshi could not even dream of, right? And we should not take that away from those brave Bangladeshi students and ordinary people that took to the streets in their tens of millions.
Yeah.
We're not taking that away from them. And that was a truly proud moment for me as a Muslim of Bangladeshi heritage. And I'm not going to take that away from any Bangladeshi, what was achieved. But you and I both know the nature of cosmetic change. Yeah, you can remove the head of the snake, that head will grow back, or will grow other limbs in different forms, and that's what we're concerned about. Many had hoped that there would be radical reforms with regards to Bangladesh's engagement with India, that there would be serious accountability and prosecution for those who were complicit in Hasina's crimes, who are still in Bangladesh, who may still actually end up in positions of power and influence. There's even an assumption that many Awami, disillusioned Awami League supporters are going to join BNP. They're not going to join Jamaat. There's even, theories that are floating about that now that there's no political party or political home for the Awami League loyalists, that they're going to either go to BNP or Jamaat-e-Islam, and they're just going to cause, instability and fitna within the various different parties. Yeah. I am a tad disappointed with the speed at which Bangladesh has moved in terms of demarcating the Hasina policies with India and this new approach to India. India and its tentacles of influence is one of the key issues which is holding Bangladesh back from success and prosperity, and that's just a fact. And until that matter is resolved, Bangladesh sadly will continue in this cycle, this perpetual cycle of over-reliance in India economically, politically and culturally. There are people right now within the Bangladeshi interim government that supported Hasina. They advanced the Indian agenda and cause through culture and popular media. Yeah. There are newspapers out there that have blood on their hands, editors with blood on their hands. There are politicians, journalists, activists, policymakers still within this new Bangladesh and the interim government of Muhammad Yunus that had engaged with India, with the raw intelligence services, that have blood on their hands. People want to see prosecution. People want to see people held to account. Yeah. So that's where the pessimism comes from. Not necessarily that Bangladesh cannot attain and achieve great things. It absolutely can. Yeah. And it has all the ingredients, a young, thriving, huge population. a very educated student population. It has all the ingredients to be a flourishing country within South Asia and Asia in general. It has huge opportunities to look towards alternative allies, whether it's a nuclear pact with Pakistan, whether it's a military or bilateral military agreement with China, or purchasing or modernizing its army. We saw how Chinese fighter jets performed in the skirmish with India and Pakistan. There's so many things that could have been explored and should be explored. I just feel that unless India is significantly removed from the equation, and make no mistake, I'm not saying that you isolate yourself from India. You simply cannot survive like that.
Yeah.
You have to coexist with India for now. Yeah? Whilst we're in this current political setup, you have to survive. It's your biggest neighbor. But there needs to be a red line. There needs to be a zero tolerance to Indian interference in Bangladeshi domestic affairs. And that is what I'm a tad disappointed about. I'm optimistic about the future of the Ummah. We have to be. Yeah, I'm optimistic about the future of my motherland. I am disappointed at the pace in which the changes happened and how radical reforms, which should have reflected a revolutionary movement and a revolutionary interim government, did not take place. And I'm very concerned about the continuation of Hasina and Awami League policies under the new BNP-led government. Inshallah ta'ala, I hope that's not the case. I pray that's not the case. But Bangladeshis are fearing that this is basically just going to be Awami League 2.0 with some rhetoric and some aesthetics of support for what happened for August the 5th. But in essence, the BNP are going to come and they're just going to do the same kind of corrupt policies and the same type of nepotism and potentially even violent crackdown on dissent. And that's what Bangladeshis are fearing. And that is what we should be praying and hoping doesn't happen, inshallah.
Dilly Hussain, I think that's really great. You brought us up to speed with this last year. And inshallah, we pray for our brothers and sisters in Bangladesh, and we hope for better times.
Ameen.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for your time.
Barakallahu fiqh.
Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels, and head over to our website thinkingmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.